also there's a slave of Allah or a child of God. They're both positions of obvious subservience.
Maybe I didn't make myself. Imagine now I'm saying, you know
it's not a physical child.
Imagine I say this. I'm going to form a football team for England.
I'm not playing. That's what I would say.
You're not supporting
I'm not
anything?
even going to be chosen.
Right. And I say, look, I will choose 11 members for that team. According to the number of children that I have. Now, what would people understand? That I have
if you
special
have 6 daughters, you're going to have a
No.
team.
Does it mean that I have somehow arbitrarily chosen certain people in England as my children who amount to 11, or I literally have 11 children?
I would say that I would hear it as that you're going to choose the number according to the number of children you have.
I have, exactly. Yes. That's my point. So this verse in Deuteronomy 32:8 could have been easily understood that way, to have this literal sense. Yeah, and this is why the scribes changed it to say, according to the children of Israel, according to the angels of God, because of this difficulty. But now we know the earliest form of that text, it says, according to the children of God. So this is an example from using the earliest extant documents.
So you're just talking about the textual variants.
No, not variant. Not variant.
Textual variants. Sorry.
Not variant. I'm saying when we look at, remember,
some of them are Israel, some of them are God.
My discussion of
but Israel was God's chosen people.
The point I was only mentioning here is when we have all this time that has passed, have the scholarship and the priests of the rabbis, of the Jewish and the Christians, have preserved and transmitted this preserved word of God. What we find that this wasn't the case. I only give you one example.
Do you mean Muslim scholars?
Scholarship, not Muslims.
So you're
this
saying
is scholarship.
Jewish and Christian scholars find that it hasn't been preserved enough?
Scholarship in general. Scholarship can be, you can be an atheist scholar, you can be a Jewish scholar, Muslim scholar, Christian scholar. A scholar is a scholar.
So there's a consensus of opinion, is there? There's the majority.
On this issue, it's quite clear that when we examine...
That's not quite answering my question. I'm going to do the majority of biblical scholars accept that there are too many of these omissions or additions.
The scholarship, regardless of who they are, they pretty much agree that there has been, during the transmission of those texts,
some
changes,
errors.
No, not errors. There are intentional and non-intentional changes.
Okay, so the non-intentional
you can discount.
Spelling mistakes.
Yeah,
just
that happens. That's normal. It's the intentional one. One of the very esteemed scholars of Christianity was called Brooks Metzger.
Okay,
have you heard of it?
Yeah, I have. I'm going to just interject and say that I would agree, because Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, have a version of the Bible that adds just an A in one verse. So it says in the...
But that's from a translation.
Yeah, but
we're talking about manuscripts.
I'm saying it changes the entire meaning. It says that Jesus is a God, not the God.
It does change the meaning.
John, the writer of that verse, was clearly saying that the word was...
I agree with you, it changes the meaning correctly.
Yes,
So what I'm simply saying, scholarship, and I gave you an example of a scholar, an esteemed scholar, liked by all kinds of people, because he is
special.
Because he is an expert of this field. Okay, he was a Christian.
Is he a religious man? Okay.
Yeah, he was a Christian.
Was?
Passed away very recently, right? Brooks Metzger. He wrote a very prominent book called the Text of the New Testament. It's this book here. If I were to show you a picture, you can read this book because it's a scholarly reference.
To be reading, but I will try.
The Text of the New Testament.
Okay.
Yeah, it's transmission, corruption, and restoration.
Okay.
The subtitle tells you
what it's about.
That there has been corruption, and there has also been some restoration.
So it tells me he's going to discuss some.
No, he gives examples. He gives examples
My point would be that because it's not a book-based religion, in that it's a personal Christianity, not Judaism, in that it's a personal relationship with God through the person of Jesus, I would say that even from the earliest writings from the church fathers, from the letters that were not included in the Bible, all of those documents, I don't think that if there was no Bible, there would be no Christians. If you say, like, I don't.
There will be Christians.
No, exactly, and I'm saying so. It doesn't. So whereas the Quran is in and of itself a miracle, like it's even though the Bible isn't esteemed, obviously, I think that without it, not that I'm advocating that, it wouldn't change the relationship of mankind to God through Christ. So any spelling, even if it changes the word God to Israel, I can then think to myself, well, Israel was chosen by God. They were his chosen people. They kept disobeying. They just were ridiculous with the disobedience. And then Christ came along to be a sacrifice to cover their sins with his blood. And I understand that Muslims don't agree with that. But
I can understand your point. The only reason I brought this up is to illustrate one point only, which is when there is a historical figure, which is also a religious figure, like Christ himself, he taught people.
Yes.
People transmitted Torah and the gospel.
And his,
People transmitted those information. They didn't just keep it themselves, right?
I've got a point about that if you remind me.
Okay. Can you remind us that she has a point on this, right? So people didn't keep it to themselves.
No.
They transmitted.
They transmitted.
The question is, when this information was transmitted, do we have this transmission history from all the various peoples that was transmitted, or there has already been...
There's no chain of narration.
Or has there already been some suppression attempts?
Okay, so my point would be that the fact that the earliest Christians, Jewish Christians, were writing to separate churches that were far from each other, the fact that those churches, they were speaking about the beliefs and practices that they already held. So they're not sending them word of how you... They are giving them advice on you should act this way, you should treat Gentiles this way, anyone who comes, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that they already had those beliefs showed that the earliest writings that we have, they're affirming those beliefs rather than transmitting them, if that makes sense. They're saying, look, we know you have this church and we would really like it if you could make sure that on a Saturday, you know, those little details. But the fact that all of those letters went to different geographical locations, they all preserved the teaching in as much as those letters match up. So if we've got copies or evidences of those early church fathers' writings, it's not a chain of narration, but we know who wrote them. We know that Paul was a prolific writer. You know, he wrote to this church, the 7 churches, all of these different. And because they were scattered, or not scattered, but because they had travelled away, the fact that they then match up again, and when Nicaea happened, even though they're omitting stuff, they're not. I don't believe that there were any additions in that not first century writings. Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't think they were saying, we're just going to add this bit.
I wasn't referring to these.
No, I understand. But
first century writings.
Said, can we verify?
But my evidence is not limited to these writings that are survived through the church fathers.
That was my point about the Bible. But, if it was completely changed.
But if you just try to engage on my point, on this point, the evidence, I'm not restricting to these writings that are preserved in the New Testament.
I see.
I'm saying the picture that we have from the surviving writings of the early Christianity is quite different than what you would now going to present. For example, early
translation, you mean
no, I'll explain to you. There are so many different forms of early Christianity.
Yes.
Before Orthodoxy, as you know today, became Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
Some early Christians believed in 2 gods. You'll be surprised and shocked.
Was
How
it
could
the
they?
Spirit and the Father? I think it was, because it was Christ's divinity.
You'd be naturally shocked. How can the Christians believe in 2 gods? 2 gods.
But you're so shocked that you think we believe in 3.
Sorry.
Just believe in
no. One God which is good and one God which is bad.
Satan.
Would you?
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that he is a God, and they say they're Christians. That's my point.
So,
there are still
give an
heretical
example.
Christians
There are
around.
Christians. They were heterogeneous in their belief in the first 300 to 400 years of Christianity.
I can accept that.
A very
Because
scholarly book written by Bert Ehrman, the agnostic.
Warwicker was a heretic, wasn't it? Like a Christian. Warwicker, the uncle.
Okay,
there were Christians in 600 years later who were still against
different
the
form.
broad teaching of the church.
Yeah. So in early Christianity was not like a monolithic, a particular form that is today like a Trinitarian,
because it's the thousands of years
so we had
tradition.
within this early Christian history, church fathers writing books called against heresies. Now think about it. It's very important to reflect on
it.
it.
How can it be a heresy if it's not well
Why would a church father need to write books to to condemn and clarify to the believers there are heretical Christians.
Okay, I would say,
unless
you've got the answer already.
Go ahead.
I've got another. I would say because in the New Testament it teaches if anyone teaches a gospel other than this, they are, and you know, they're to be rebuked. They're to be taught.
Very good point. Very good point.
There will be
So what is
Antichrist?
very good? Very good. I appreciate your knowledge and understanding on this. So what this establishes is that it wasn't from the earlier time one particular narrative about the teaching of Christ transmitted.
No, it's just his
there were other people who transmitted a different teaching.
I would say
and this
differing.
is different.
Yes.
Okay, let's agree with that.
Differing.
Different. Let's agree with that. Differing teaching from the very earlier on, which prompted prominent church fathers to write books to say, don't follow them.
Yes.
They are not following the true Christianity. Right. But what it shows is that there are existing people who form set of belief system which were not necessarily the same as today. One group clearly was condemned by Origen or
Oh yeah, I know.
some of the church fathers, Irenaeus, were the people who didn't believe in Christ
As
being
divine.
crucified.
Being crucified.
Remember, yes. Remember, one of the things that is now levied against Islam by Christian.
Yeah, there can be no salvation without the blood of Christ, and if Islam believes
Christians,
he was crucified, then
Christians,
they're anti-Christian.
Christians often come and say crucifixion is an undeniable, undisputable fact
Well, it's
of
verified
history.
by history.
Please. My point here. Christians often tell us this is undisputable event of history. This is where we would disagree. There are ample evidence surviving from the Christians themselves saying there are a large enough body of people who did not believe Christ was crucified.
Because they saw him alive again once he was risen. 500 people saw him.
The question is not about what form they saw. You can interpret it in different ways, right? In fact, it's interpreted somehow like these people didn't believe that Christ can suffer bodily. So they said he cannot suffer. So various forms of this. But what it establishes is this crucifixion is not like that's what it says, and Islam gets it all wrong. In fact, to clarify that point, Quran doesn't even deny a crucifixion happening.
Can I just ask then about a verse?
What did you think?
I think it says that they boasted that they killed him, but they slew him not. It was just made to appear to them as if he had been killed.
So it appeared to them. Imagine, I use this example to. So it appeared. Okay, imagine now, people walking over there, and they're seeing you and saying, okay, we have seen the Princess of Spain having a discussion in Speaker's Corner, and they went and go and start talking about it in their social media and so on and so forth, thinking you are the Princess of Spain. Now,
I'll take the paycheck, but I mean, I'm not.
That's their mistaken.
Yes.
What?
Yes. So that means that
perception
that I am not, but I'm saying that Christ was crucified
no,
and
the
rose
point,
again.
The Quran, the way the Quran describes this event.
Do you say that Islam teaches Christ crucified or not?
I'm going to answer your question.
Because who was?
But I want to.
Was it the Jews?
I want to answer this question by saying what the Quran says first of all. Okay.
Yep.
Quran categorically affirms that he was not crucified or killed. Right?
Okay, so then there's a huge disagreement.
But what the Quran doesn't say is that there was no such crucifixion ever happening or not. So it simply says people mistakenly perceived that Christ was being crucified.
Okay, so
and Quran rejects that claim and denies that claim.
I would say then there are two things. There are that Christ now must be in heaven alive, like bodily in his Islamic, how if he didn't die, where is he? If he was taken immediately up by Allah, why? Because if he was righteous, Allah, I believe he prescribed to sacrifice and that kind of thing previous. I don't know. Is it just
so again very logical and important question to ask.
My other point would be that Muhammad came at least say 600 years, 625 years after these events, and these events were already being preached by Christians as a redemptive factor in their salvation, apart from repentance and trust.
That's why it makes it very significant.
And I would say it makes it counter-Christian because it is then denying the blood of Christ as a sole way to heaven. Christ himself said he is the only way.
So spot on, huge theological difference, right?
Definitely.
So what we believe is Allah took him up,
Yeah.
and he's in second heaven,
Only second.
and he was in
Only
heaven.
righteous, but
No.
only the second
This
heaven.
heaven is not the paradise.
Which heaven is Muhammad in?
No, he's not in heaven
Why not?
because
I'm
this,
sure
this
there's a hadith
No,
that
no,
says
let
that
me
he
let me
is.
tell you. Let
He
me tell you.
spoke to Moses, and he popped down and
When
spoke
we
to
talk
Isa.
about these heavens,
Yeah.
we're not talking about paradise. We're not talking about the Quran talks about this. They had human bodies. Nothing happened to that. So even if Christ is went up there, doesn't matter
I
if
just
it's.
wondered, does it say so specifically? Are there hadith or something that talks
I don't
about
think it does, but it's understood that he's alive, and God is the one who provides the sustenance, right? Keeping him alive. So when he's going to come down and descend, he has two major roles to play. Two major roles. One is to fight the Antichrist. The Antichrist is not Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, according to what some Christians believe.
No, I think the Antichrist is a supernatural entity.
Fair
I
enough.
believe there are
Fair
humans who have anti-Christian
Sure.
or anti-Christ.
So an Antichrist has already been taught or warned by many prophets in the past, because he is what we call fitna in Arabic, which is like tribulation, because this individual will come a place and make the whole world under his control in various ways because of technological advancements perhaps, and the world will be really in tribulation. So he's a dangerous individual. He will declare himself to be the one like God. So people shouldn't be worshipping God, should be believing in him instead. So this individual will be killed. That's why he's called Antichrist. Christ will eliminate him, kill him, and then he will establish on this earth a peaceful
for 1,000 years.
Peaceful coexistence of this earth, about 40 years or so. Okay, 40 years or so, where people will be believing in God. Okay, and he will establish justice and peace on this earth, according to God's law. Of course, mercy.
Justice and mercy are not the same.
He also, Quran and our Hadith reports, he will break the cross and kill the pigs. These are symbolic. No, these are symbolic utterance to imply that those people who worshipped him as God. Sorry to disappoint you.
No, I don't believe a word of it. So
right. Yeah, of course, fine. But that's our tradition.
Yeah.
That he will make it clear to them that's not acceptable because I am not God. I am the creation of God, who is the Messiah.
So when he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, I am the first and the last, how do you get, I'm sure you can get
so
around
let's discuss that. No, I'm getting around it.
No,
Let's
I'm
discuss
saying
this.
I'm sure you have a way to say that that's not your belief and, you know, that doesn't make him equal to Allah. And that's confirmed by Muhammad, isn't it? Yeah.
When somebody says I'm Alpha and Omega,
That's
now
a specific name of Allah.
Allah's
The
name is
first
Alpha and
and the
Omega.
last.
No. Alpha doesn't mean first. Omega doesn't mean last. These
Okay,
are
so
just
Revelations-
letters of the alphabet.
It repeats that. It says, Christ says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. So it's two separate titles that he's claiming.
But wouldn't that be a problem in your understanding?
No, it wouldn't be a problem in my understanding.
What about the Father? Is he Alpha?
Yes. God is the first and the last.
No, let's talk about individually. Is Christ Alpha or the Father Alpha?
Both.
So how can they say I am the only?
He didn't say I'm the only Alpha. He said I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. And I believe he is the God, and so is the Father, and so is the Spirit. So they're not contradictory if I say all three of them are have those attributes, because they're three. I'm sure you understand the Trinity, you just don't accept it. Like I don't have to explain the actual, they're one in purpose, they're one in authority, they're one in power, they're one in essence, they're all that. Apart
Did they choose to be together? No, did they exercise their choice to remain together?
I imagine so. I don't know if it's possible for
Or
them
was it
to be
forced?
apart.
Was it forced?
By who? Who could force God to do anything?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm asking you. Who?
Yeah, if it's not forced, it's by choice. That means.
Or it's just I can't choose to separate. I can choose to separate my legs. I can't choose to separate out something.
Can the Father choose to separate from the Son?
Yes.
That means they have a choice.
No, not in terms of a disagreement or a separation.
Can they disagree?
I wouldn't.
Are they independent enough to disagree?
Yes, Christ could have acted. He could have, but he was sinless, so he didn't. But as a man, he could have said something.
As God.
No, whilst they're in one essence, no, I don't think. I'm not a theologian, but I don't think so.
This is where the Trinitarian understanding, or anything that has more than one absolute being, it's a real difficult question for people to accept.